up on the world today. The crowd sings "God Save the King" as King Charles III arrives at Buckingham Palace for the first time since his mother's passing. A gun salutes fire, church bells toll across Britain in tribute to the Queen. And current and former Prime Ministers of Britain pay tribute to Queen Elizabeth, with Liz Truss describing her as the rock of Britain. Well, this is the moment Prince Charles, King Charles III, arrived at Buckingham Palace a day after Queen Elizabeth II passed on Thursday night. There we see the Queen consort Camilla stepping out of the vehicle, and then Prince Charles III, both of them in black, a crowd cheering them on as they approach the gates of Buckingham Palace. But King Charles had to get used to that. King Charles takes some time to greet the crowd. There he is, shaking hands and receiving condolences from people who probably have been there hours waiting for him. Buckingham Palace had announced yesterday he would be arriving in London today following his mother's passing. The King is expected to give an addressing the nation at 6 p.m. That's in about an hour. He will be officially proclaimed king at a meeting of the Session Council attended by his son, Prince William, on Saturday. People have been leaving flowers and tributes outside palaces and churches as the UK marks the Queen's passing. She died peacefully, according to Buckingham Palace, at Balmoral Castle on Thursday afternoon. She was aged 96.
Enjoy the moment.
Well, the House of Commons today held a minute's silence following the death of the Queen. Commons Speaker Lindsay Hoyle and Prime Minister Liz Truss led the tributes. Politicians of all stripes stood in the crowded chamber with their heads bowed. They rose to their feet, largely dressed in black, in tribute to the late monarch. Addressing Parliament, Prime Minister Liz Truss described the Queen as the rock on which modern Britain was built. Also paying tributes, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson said the Queen showed the world how to give, love and serve. While Theresa May had Parliament in stitches of laughter as she recalled dropping cheese in front of the Queen.
It is with the greatest
Balmoral Castle
that I rise to say a few words.
Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, was one of the greatest leaders the world has ever known. She was the rock on which modern Britain was built. She came to the throne at just 25, in a country that was emerging from the shadow of war. She bequeaths a modern, dynamic nation that has grown and flourished under her reign. The United Kingdom is the great country it is today because of her. The Commonwealth is the family of nations it is today because of her. She was devoted to the union of England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. She served 15 countries as head of state, and she loved them all.
She showed the world not just how to reign over a people, she showed the world how to give, how to love, and how to serve. And as we look back at that vast arc of service, its sheer duration is almost impossible to take in. She was the last living person in British public life to have served in uniform in the Second World War. She was the first female member of the royal family in 1,000 years to serve full-time in the armed forces. And the fact that today we can say with such confidence, God save the King, is a tribute to him, but above all to Elizabeth the Great, who worked so hard for the good of her country, not just now, but for generations to come. That is why we mourn her so deeply, and it is in the depths of our grief that we understand why we loved her
I remember one picnic at Balmoral which was taking place in one of the bothies on the estate. The hampers came from the castle and we all mucked in to put the food and drink out on the table. I picked up some cheese, put it on a plate and was transferring it to the table. The cheese fell on the floor. I had a split-second decision to make. I picked up the cheese, put it on the plate and put it on the table. And I turned round to see that my every move had been watched very carefully by Her Majesty the Queen. I looked at her, she looked at me, and she just smiled. And the cheese remained on the table.
Tributes coming in from former Prime Ministers of the UK. In the meantime, members of the public have travelled to leave flowers, messages and thanks and condolences for the Queen and the royal family, with many visibly tearful, overcome with emotion. Union Jacks are being flown at half-mast, and Lords and MPs have gathered to pay tributes to her momentous 70-year reign. Let's take a look at tributes so far today.
Gun salutes were fired across Britain to mark the passing of Queen Elizabeth. Each artillery unit fired 96 shots, one for each year of the Queen's life. The gun salutes followed bells tolling at Westminster Abbey, St. Paul's Cathedral and Windsor Castle. Meanwhile, people have been leaving flowers and tributes outside palaces and churches as the UK marks her passing.
I think shock, sadness, but then also you want to celebrate what, an amazing woman she was, and the legacy she left was, and you just felt we had to come here today and just pay our respects, because she's always been part of our lives and we're very unlikely to ever have a queen in our lives again. So just want to remember her really. And
I think from the yesterday lunchtime's developments, I think that, there was obviously something very serious going on. But, I mean, what an amazing lady. She was working right up until, 2 days before, swearing in a new Prime Minister. That's quite remarkable. That really is when somebody takes an oath to serve their country and their sense of duty to last their whole life. I mean, what a shining example of that.
Since I was a child, we've seen her, it's just like a war, really, and I think it's a great shock for the nation. I think it hurt, and a lot of people are mourning. Yeah, I think it's a great loss for the country and for everybody around the world as well.
Buckingham Palace said there would be a period of mourning to be observed by members of the family and the royal household until a week after the funeral, the date of which has not yet been confirmed, but is expected in about 10 days' time.
Our correspondent, Juliana Laika, has been following the developments. She joins us now for an update. Juliana, I know you've been out all day today just observing, the reactions as they pour in for the Queen. It's just been, well, it's more than 24 hours, since the announcement by Buckingham Palace, well, almost 48 hours, 24 hours, beg your pardon. And those flowers and the letters are up at Buckingham Palace. They're also at Balmoral Castle. People are also leaving them at churches, any public place. I think people just trying to, express, that connection that they feel towards the Queen. What else is planned, what else is up in Operation London Bridge?
Good afternoon, Amarachi. It's really difficult to try and put into words the state of the nation at the moment. I just heard some of those voices from ordinary Britons who were expressing their grief. It's actually been a pretty difficult 24 hours, to say the least. But nevertheless, Britain has been plunged into a state of mourning. And as was just outlined, this is expected to remain in place until 7 days after Her Majesty's funeral. Operation London Bridge, which we have speculated about but have never been able to speak about, is a very robust, meticulous operation that has been under the works since the 1960s. It's updated every year and it is playing out as we speak. It started with King Charles III leaving Balmoral and leaving Edinburgh to travel down into London. He was outside Buckingham Palace. I believe he, alongside his wife, the Queen Consort, was speaking to members of the crowd for at least 12 minutes. We believe he may have already spoken to Prime Minister Liz Truss, and as you were just doing, playing some of those tributes from ministers in the House of Commons today. They will also meet again tomorrow, which is unusual for the ministers, but they will meet tomorrow to pledge an oath to King Charles III. Now, it isn't compulsory, but given the kind of climate, it will be interesting to see if any minister does rebel from doing that. As you also said, Amarachi, we are expecting the first public address, which will be televised across all mainstream media here in the UK, of King Charles III. And this is going to be a very, very difficult speech for him. Of course, he was his longest serving heir. So, you know, he was born to be king. And I suspect this is a moment that has been planned and prepared for his entire life. But we know that the Queen was deeply loved, deeply admired, and deeply cherished. And only time and history will tell if he is able to replicate even an inch of what she was able to do. He is likely to be very stoic, but then he will also have to be authentic, and it is for the king to choose how he will address the nation when he does so. As the king is speaking, we are also going to have a tribute ceremony taking place at St. Paul's Cathedral. This is for members of the public. I believe it is a first come, first serve at that event, and over 2,000 people will be expected. Tomorrow, alongside the swearing of the oath to the king, we also start the process of officially transitioning the power. So the Ascension will take place tomorrow, not the coronation, which is completely different. We're not expecting that possibly for the next 8 to 12 months. But the Ascension will take place tomorrow. King Charles, alongside the new Duke of the Prince of Wales, the Duke of Cornwall and Cambridge. So at the moment, Prince William is now known as the Duke of Cornwall and Cambridge. Once the King has ascended tomorrow, he will now be the Prince of Wales. He will join his father tomorrow at the Privy Council to talk about government business, and we're not expected to see the Queen's coffin until Sunday, when it will be driven from Balmoral, where she is now, to Holyrood Castle. She will then be flown into London on Tuesday to Buckingham Palace, and then on Wednesday, Her Majesty the Queen will lie in state, I believe, for 3 days until we start seeing world leaders fly into the country on Friday for the state funeral, which we expect will take place on Monday, the 19th of September.
So really elaborate preparations being made for the Queen, but she does deserve this tribute. I mean, for the whole country and indeed the Commonwealth paying this tribute to her. And, you know, every once in a while you hear the name, well, you have to get used to it, King Charles III. I know that, I mean, it's becoming, I mean, we have to get used to calling him king. I'm wondering if, you know, Britons already see him as that. I mean, Liz Truss, the Prime Minister, was the first to refer to him as king and even, pray for him to live long when she said, "Long live the king." It was a bit of a jolt, just the reality that the Queen really is no more. Haven't seen a King of England in years. So how used to him will people be, and how used will he be to being their king? I mean, has it begun to show those kingly qualities, perhaps?
You've touched on some really important points there, Amarachi. And first of all, yes, as we spoke about Operation London Bridge, the first individual in the world to have been informed about the Queen's passing outside of the royal household was indeed Prime Minister Liz Truss. That phone call was made before the official announcement was made on national airwaves. And that's when the title was informed. She was informed of his title and she declared it to the world. I think, let's remember that the Queen was on the throne for 70 years. So it's been less than 24 hours. So to get used to King Charles III is going to take a long time. It's not just saying the name; it's feeling the name, isn't it? And it's again, history is going to tell us if we are going to be able to stomach it as we were with the Queen. It feels wrong, but it would be wrong of me not to talk about the backlash. It's really hard sometimes, Amarachi, when you're looking at social media, because we know all too well that you can't look at social media to test the temperature of the nation, but we do live in an era of fast-moving news, and not everybody is mourning the loss of Her Majesty. There is a spat, shall we say, at the moment on social media between those who see the royal family as people who did a lot of nasty things to the majority of the world. And I think with King Charles III in his role as the Prince of Wales, he was a pretty controversial character and he was very outspoken. Some people thought some of his displays were hypocritical, talking about saving the climate, but then, of course, living a very lavish life with a long global carbon footprint. But then, of course, not all of us feel that way. And I think people have to understand that this was still his mother. And he is known in the media to be a very emotional individual. So he too is grieving, and he now carries the burden of a significant role and tenure. And long may he reign. God Save the Queen, which is a very famous, world-famous song, something that's sung at every football match with England and any nation. The national anthem is very well known. I did read just a couple of minutes ago that already the first version of the new anthem is being produced as we speak. And it is going to be difficult. You can't look anywhere without seeing the Queen. The Queen is on the currency. The Queen is on our postal marks. The Queen is written within our hearts, and the Queen's face is on every billboard that's available in Britain today. So it is going to be difficult. But I think, again, it's important that we do say that not every single individual is mourning this moment. And there are some that look at the royal family and think that the family has stain. But I suppose it's too early to go into that, but I think it's an important point that needs to be addressed.
Indeed, it might be addressed in the coming days. Juliana, thanks again for keeping your ears so close to the ground.
Thank you very much.
Coming up after the break. Gun salutes for the Queen. Australia holds a 96th gun salute to honour Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. Welcome back to the program. We're still taking more reactions and tributes to Queen Elizabeth, Britain's longest-serving ruler and monarch. King Charles III takes over from tomorrow, as we've heard from our correspondent in London, Juliana. Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, said her life was full, but she never, even in bad moments, lost hope. The late Queen also served as Supreme Governor of the Church of England, a position now taken over by King Charles III.
The Queen constantly showed us the meaning of life. She was joyful, she was humorous, life was full. Even in the annus horribilis, as she so perfectly summed up the most difficult year possibly of her reign. Her life was full, but she never, even in bad moments, lost hope. I obviously spoke to her after the death of the Duke of Edinburgh and spent some time with her. And there was just a solidity of hope in her life. That's the second word. Abundance and hope. They are still there. She lived in the present. So she lived in the present with her first Prime Minister, who had been in a cavalry charge. And she lived in the present with human beings landing on the moon. She lived in the present with the COVID. She lived in the present at every moment. You saw her face. It feels as though, I think for probably so many people around the world, especially in the United Kingdom, that a part of our lives that was taken for granted as being permanent is no longer there. And in that sense, there is an enormous shift in the world around us, in how we see it and how we understand ourselves. My message is very simple. Bring all your grief and anxiety. Bring the sense of loss with complete honesty. Let us not pretend that this is anything but the most enormous change, the most enormous blow, especially to her immediate family. Don't forget them. But my message is, let's not hide the fact that this is an enormous blow. But as Her late Majesty showed us, and as His Majesty is showing and will show us, let us bring that grief and be willing to receive comfort, a fresh abundance of life, and a deep hope for the future.
The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, on the life of Queen Elizabeth II. Now, outside the UK, people across Europe are also paying their respects to Queen Elizabeth, laying flowers at embassies and monuments and reflecting on her legacy after her death at Balmoral Castle at the age of 96. In Berlin, commuters and tourists had different views on the British monarch. A young Dutchman who lives in Berlin said he was touched by the Queen's death because he too was born in a kingdom. Germans who passed by expressed less sympathy. Christoph Krebs said death was a part of life and he won't mourn her or anything. In Rome, by the British Embassy, local resident Debbie Della Sandri said it's very strange because obviously she represents what there was of stability in everybody's life. Madrid Isabel Ayuso, the conservative leader of Spain's Madrid region, has declared 3 days of mourning with flags flying at half-mast and the region's headquarters being illuminated with the colors of the Union flag. Local residents hailed the monarch as an important figure for the whole world and expressed their sympathy for Britons. In Paris, people laid flowers at the Liberty statue, which is seen as a memorial monument for the late Princess Diana, and expressed their shock and respect for the monarch. French President Emmanuel Macron paid his homage to the late Queen Elizabeth II, remembered by many for anchoring her country through upheaval with poise and grace for longer than many have lived. President Macron laid a white rose in front of a picture of the Queen and signed a guest book in memory of the monarch inside the British Embassy in Paris. Outside, giant portraits of the Queen hung in front of them on the building's facade, where flowers had been offered by sympathizers.
We are grateful for her deep affection for France. Elizabeth II mastered our language, loved our culture, and touched our hearts. From her coronation on, she knew and spoke with all of our presidents. No other country had the privilege of welcoming her as many times as we did. In her, I have known a great head of state, a unique example of her devotion to her people, and a very close ally. With her, France and the United Kingdom shared not just an entente cordiale, but a warm, sincere, and loyal partnership. To you, she was your queen. To us, she was the queen. To us all, she would be with us forever. We will remember and perpetuate the values she never ceased to embody and promote, the moral fortitude of democracy and freedom.
Elodie, we will never agree on everything. Life would be dull indeed, not least for the rest of the world, if we did not allow ourselves a little space to live up to our national caricatures. British pragmatism and French élan, French conceptualism and British humour, British rain and French sun. I think we should enjoy the complementarity of it all. Thank you for those words, ma'am. Thank you for your service. God save the King.
Stay with our coverage of the aftermath of Queen Elizabeth II's passing in the UK and the new era that begins. Joining me now is President of the Nigerian Britain Association, Bimbo Okoya-Thomas. Bimbo joins me from Lagos. Bimbo, thank you for making time to be with me this evening. And you're probably one of the few Nigerians who got a glimpse of the Queen when she appeared on the balcony of Buckingham Palace very briefly to wave to the crowd, celebrating her Platinum Jubilee back in June. How do you cherish those memories now in light of what happened yesterday?
The Nigeria Britain Association offers its deep and sincerest condolences to the loss of our dear Queen. Just being invited to that event was something that we really cherished, and we didn't realize that, it was happening for a reason, because now we look back and it was truly a once-in-a-lifetime moment that we shared. Just seeing her at the end of the program where she came to wave to the crowd was just heartwarming, and we really appreciated that. She had a long and really good reign, and we appreciate her strength, her resilience over the years, and how she kept her promise to serve her country.
Yeah, and incidentally, you and I were at the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebration in Lagos, the Deputy High Commission. You attended the memorial for Prince Philip also this year. Prince Philip died last year. What have you observed about how the royal family is handling the loss of the Queen?
So as you mentioned, I was able to attend these key events this year, and especially when we had the memorial service for the Prince Edward. I mean, I remember that it was really momentous, and we were able to see the now king there, and also other members of the royal family. I mean, it was just one of those once-in-a-lifetime moments where we were pinching ourselves because, we were there surrounded by their family and well-wishers, and also other charities and NGOs that they supported as well.
And King Charles III will be making his first address as king in a few minutes. How is he being sized up against the Queen, you think?
So the thing is that I got some insider information that he likes to share some jokes. Now, the thing is that helps to liven the moment because, when you're meeting a monarch, you're tense because you're wondering what are the protocols, how do you approach him and things like that. But by him sharing some jokes, it just helps to warm you to him and ease the conversation. So I think that he's very warm. He's also very approachable, and that would really help him in terms of forging relationships that can transcend time. And I know that people easily warm to him, and I know that would be something that would really help.
The Nigerian-Britain Association has existed for as long as we can remember under Queen Elizabeth II, and the association has grown under the Queen, hasn't it? How will the NBA be honoring her at this time?
So the Nigeria-Britain Association has been around for over 53 years. We were formed as a corresponding association as part of the British Nigeria Education Trust, which has the late Prince Philip as its patron. Right now, we are currently grieving the late Queen, and we were there to also, mourn with her earlier when she was also mourning the loss of her husband. Nigeria-Britain Association will continue its legacy, which is to forge the arms of friendship between both Nigeria and Britain for the common good. And we hope that this occasion would also help in terms of highlighting the need for true friendship in order to move forward for the common good of all. So just sharing that ethos, not just to Nigeria and Britain and members of the Commonwealth, but also the nation and the world at large.
Bimbo, thank you again for joining us on the program. We're all mourning the Queen at this time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
It's out to the United States, where President Joe Biden has signed the condolence book at the British Embassy in Washington, D.C., following the death of Queen Elizabeth II, Britain's longest reigning monarch. First Lady Jill Biden also sat down to sign the book. At the embassy, the Union Jack was lowered to fly at half-mast in tribute to Her Majesty, the Queen. President Biden said he had the opportunity to meet her before she passed, and she was an incredibly gracious and decent woman.
She enjoyed those encounters very much. She attended key sense of curiosity. Mr. President, could I invite you to sign the book? Yes.
Am I able to write a message?
If you would like to, sir.
I would like to.
Meanwhile, Brits and Americans living in Los Angeles have been reflecting on Queen Elizabeth II in the wake of her death.
Well, thank you. You're welcome. Thanks for talking to me for a little while.
Come down here. Go back.
See people like, oh yeah, my wife went out to the bar, her favorite bar, I don't want her there.
Our president of the International Olympic Committee, Thomas Bach, has paid tribute to Her Majesty the Queen at an IOC Executive Board meeting. The Queen opened two Olympics, the 2012 Games in London and the 1976 Montreal events. She was patron of the British Olympic Association.
With the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, we have lost a great supporter of sport and of the Olympic movement. Her Majesty was the only head of state to declare open 2 editions of the Olympic Games and was already present at the Olympic Games, London 1948. As patron of the British Olympic Association, she provided invaluable advice and help to the Olympic community. Whenever one could see her attending a sports event, you could feel her appreciation of sport and of how much joy it brought to her. She was herself an accomplished equestrian. This enjoyment of sport and her wonderful sense of humor was clearly represented in her appearance at the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games, London 2012, where her participation in the world-famous video sketch will be remembered fondly by everyone who saw it. Our thoughts are with the royal family, and in particular our IOC colleague, Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal, and all the members of the Olympic community in the United Kingdom and across the Commonwealth. In her honor, the Olympic flag is flying at half-mast, and I would like now to ask you to join me in standing for a minute of silence as a sign of respect and appreciation for Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
And Australia's iconic Sydney Opera House has lit up with an image of Queen Elizabeth, and buildings across the country turned purple to pay tribute to the late monarch. A crowd gathered along the foreshore to watch as an image of Queen Elizabeth II was projected onto the sills of the Opera House. Elsewhere, landmarks across Melbourne turned purple as night fell and will be lit up purple every night until the evening of the Queen's funeral. When we come back after the break, more tributes to the Queen, plus Europe's energy crisis as EU ministers meet over an energy war. Our bills still surging. Stay with us. Welcome back. And amidst the mourning of the Queen across the UK and the Commonwealth, there is still a war in Ukraine, which claims to have retaken more than 1,000 square kilometers of territory in its south and east from Russia in the last week. President Volodymyr Zelensky says the area had been liberated as part of a counteroffensive since 1st of September. More than 20 villages in the Kharkiv region have also been recaptured. Another general claims Russian forces have disputed some of the advances, which, if confirmed, will mark a significant victory for Ukraine. President Zelensky says in his nightly address, Kyiv has liberated dozens of settlements near the northeastern Kharkiv region so far this month. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has met with NATO head Jens Stoltenberg after a visit to Kyiv as Washington seeks to strengthen unity, Europe facing a winter of raised energy costs. Blinken also met with ambassadors from the alliance in part to report back from his trip, on which he pledged new military aid and was briefed on Ukraine's counteroffensive against Russian forces. A senior State Department official said ahead of the visit to Brussels, as part of the constant gardening of the Biden administration has been doing to maintain unity among European nations.
Our unity here at NATO, across our alliances and partnerships, at the United Nations, and other international institutions, is essential to advancing our objectives, shared objectives, supporting Ukraine's capacity to defend itself, sustaining pressure on Russia for its aggression, ensuring that Ukraine is in the strongest position when conditions are right for negotiations. It's also an opportunity to make a decisive shift, finally, once and for all, away from dependence on Russian energy, which Putin will never stop trying to weaponize, to Europe's detriment, and to make the transition to renewable sources necessary as well to combat the climate crisis. we can, we will emerge stronger and in a better place. And that's why it's so vital that we stay the course, that we stay united.
The winter is coming, it's going to be hard, and therefore we need both to continue to supply weapons and ammunition, but also winter clothing, tents, generators, and all the specific equipment which is needed for the winter. Partly because the size of the Ukrainian army has just increased so much, they need more of this kind of winter equipment, and NATO is particularly focused on how can we provide tens of thousands of, for instance, winter uniforms to the Ukrainian army.
The chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Tilley, says Ukraine is using its modern Western weapons to devastating effect, striking hundreds of Russian targets with the U.S.-supplied HIMARS rocket system alone. It comes as the U.S. yesterday announced $2.7 billion in additional aid for Ukraine and its allies and approved an additional $675 million weapons package for the country.
Ukraine's future forces with the capabilities that they need.
The United States has provided almost 500,000 rounds of 155 artillery as an example. The United States has made a significant commitment, but so have the other countries. All of the countries are providing and according to their need, and Ukraine is being well supplied with all of the systems needed to defend themselves. We are seeing real and measurable gains from Ukraine in the use of these systems. For example, the Ukrainians have struck over 400 targets with the HIMARS, and they've had devastating effect. Russian lines of communication and supply channels are severely strained.
The Ukrainians have put to use, good use, the equipment that we provided them, and we see those effects on the battlefield as we speak. HIMARS are one example, but there are other examples as well. Ukrainians have inflicted significant damage to the Russian supply lines and ammunition supply points and command and control nodes as they continue to shape the battlefield to be able to maneuver to retake some of their sovereign territory. Right now, Ukraine urgently needs more artillery systems and ammunition. It also needs air defense, and coastal defense, and other critical capabilities. The United States has stepped up to meet those needs, and I'm very glad that so many of our allies and partners have as well.
Now, the European Union is trying to get rising energy prices under control. Today, energy ministers have been meeting in Brussels. Lars Holter is with the Deutsche Welle in Berlin, to tell us more about what's expected out of that meeting. Lars, thanks for joining us on the program. And what's the plan to keep energy prices reasonably low during the ongoing energy crisis in Europe?
Well, it's all about the money, and in this particular case, it's about shifting money around from one party to the other. Specifically, that means the EU Commission proposes that the companies that generate electricity cheaply, and right now this is solar and wind energy providers, that they will have to pay an extra levy. It's intended to make up, of course, the difference between these sources and gas-generated electricity. Gas-generated electricity, of course, has become the most expensive form of electricity on the market right now. Now, is this fair? That is the main question, of course. But with energy prices way up, the renewables are making a lot more money that they would have ever expected to make, so it would not really hurt them. And of course, green energy is not the only target of measures here. It's also oil and some coal companies, because they also have made extremely high profits over the recent months as gas prices went up. And they are expected to be taxed as well with what the EU right now calls a solidarity contribution. The extra revenue raised that way is set to be passed on by member states to the poorer consumers and also to struggling businesses to subsidize their electricity bills, and that should get people, hopefully, through winter.
No one wants a bleak winter, do they? But other than price controls and financial help, what else are countries planning to do, Lars?
Well, mostly the EU is also trying to work on the demand side of the equation. That means they're trying to lower energy consumption. EU member states, of course, are expecting to make a binding commitment for once to reduce consumption during peak hours in the morning and evening. And that is something that many have already prepared for. Recent steps in Germany, of course, were things like turning the lights off at monuments and wherever else they are not necessary, or announcing that government buildings won't be heated as much as usual. Public pools have been cooled down for the last couple of weeks. All these relatively small measures, they save anywhere between 10 and 20% of energy use. Things like stores that can't keep their doors open all the time now. And of course, people themselves have also been asked to conserve energy wherever they can within their own homes.
So hopefully there will be some solution coming out of that meeting in Brussels. Speaking of which, what's the mood in Brussels like today? Are members mostly in agreement already?
Well, EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says that she is confident that measures can be implemented relatively quickly, meaning that member states will actually agree. She does know that Germany will back her up. She knows that because Chancellor Olaf Scholz has already agreed. Also, France seems to be on board after what we have heard from Emmanuel Macron. It is a little bit more complicated for Spain, Italy and Greece, because they would have to change their individual systems again, because those countries have already introduced an excess profit tax for energy companies, and they have also had price caps installed, and that's a system that would have to be reworked again. But of course, that doesn't seem like an obstacle that couldn't be overcome. And then, of course, there's Hungary. Hungary usually voting against Brussels, and they have already rejected some of the latest measures here when it comes to energy policy. So after all, as of right now, it is unclear whether and when all member states will agree.
Deutsche Welle's Lars Holter with the updates from Brussels, from Berlin. And just a reminder that top of the hour, King Charles III will be making his first public address to the nation following the demise of the Queen. In the meantime, Australia paid tribute to Queen Elizabeth by honouring her with a 96-gun salute outside the Parliament House, one for every year of her life.
Number 6.
I am proud to have lived in the second Elizabethan age. Her legacy will be profound. History will remember few like Queen Elizabeth II. We mourn her passing. We are grateful that we have witnessed and benefited from her remarkable life. May she rest in peace.
Just a reminder again, King Charles III will be making an address to the nation for the first time as sovereign following the death of Queen Elizabeth II. About an hour ago, the monarch held an in-person audience with Prime Minister Liz Truss at Buckingham Palace. Earlier, he greeted crowds outside Buckingham Palace on his return to London with Camilla, the Queen Consort. Queen Britain's longest reigning monarch died peacefully at Balmoral Castle in Scotland on Thursday. She was aged 96. The sun shone brightly as the new king emerged from the state limousine outside the palace to shake hands with people who had gathered there. cheers as Brazilians shouts of God Save the King. The crowd swelled against barriers assembled across the entire length of the palace forecourt. One woman in the crowd was so moved by the occasion, she leaned forward and embraced him with a kiss. Meanwhile, there will be a remembrance service at St. Paul's Cathedral in London at about 6 p.m., also attended by senior politicians. It will also be open to the public, and 2,000 tickets were released on a first-come, first-served basis. King Charles will be officially proclaimed king at the Accession Council at 10 in the morning on Saturday, in a ceremony televised for the first time. We'll be here to televise live the first address to the nation by King Charles III right here on Channels Television. Thank you for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.